Hello, I'm Darren Magee and welcome to my mental health information and awareness channel. Now, today's topic is on domestic abuse. Domestic abuse from a male perspective. Now, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please check out my other videos on mental health related topics and please consider subscribing to my channel. Now, first of all, let's look at what abuse is. Now, abuse could be defined as one person inflicting their will on another in order to disempower them, control them, humiliate them. Now, this can be through, say, acts of aggression, intimidation, guilt tripping, shaming. There are different ways that someone can be abused. They can be abused physically, emotionally, psychologically. There could be spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, financial. There are so many different types. And the abuse can take many different forms, including being controlled, constantly being checked up on, constantly questioned or stalked. There can be constant mocking, bullying, humiliation, constant criticism and insults. There's being isolated from friends, family, destruction of personal possessions, being denied access to children, on and on it goes. Lastly, I would say there's abuse through neglect. Now, I would describe this as like a sin of omission rather than commission, in the sense that the abuser deliberately withholds things like empathy, validation, acknowledgement, ignoring the other person, ignoring their basic needs. And I would often describe that as a more insidious form of abuse because, if the perpetrators to be confronted, well, they haven't actually done anything. In short, though, it's any form of deliberate domination, threat, coercion over another person. The current beliefs tend to show domestic abuse is often considered to be a woman's issue. However, it's important to recognise it happens to men as well, because according to the Office for National Statistics, 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse in the UK are male. Now that's an average of 450,000 men every year. So what is it happens when men are the victims of domestic abuse? Well, not that dissimilar as to what happens to women. It affects self-esteem, self-confidence. It can lead to things like addiction, lead to obsessive compulsive behaviors, constantly searching for danger, risk assessing. The victims are traumatized. Now, I've made a video recently on narcissistic abuse syndrome and how that affects people. I'll put a link of that into the description if you want to check that out. The difference is, though, when it comes to being a man, when it comes to men, there is this idea that big boys don't cry. You don't talk about your feelings. That's a sign of weakness. Now, in the making of this video, I asked some men who had suffered different kinds of domestic abuse about their experiences. Not just the abuse, but their experiences of even when they were seeking help. Now, the recurring theme was a lot of them felt and were at times treated like they were at fault for being abused, or they had done something wrong to deserve it. Some talked about how difficult it was just trying to get someone to believe them. And some reported feeling like the system was weighted against them when it came to them trying to get access to their own children. Also, it was drawn to my attention recently there have been some social experiment videos produced, and I watched them here on YouTube. It's where actors pretend to be a couple and they take turns abusing each other in public. Now, the recurring theme in those videos, the few that I watched, has been when the man is being abusive towards the woman, when he's being aggressive, holding her hands down, shouting in her face and so on, the people around tend to look quite concerned and some people even intervene. But when the roles were reversed, when the woman was being abusive towards the man, hitting him, slapping his face, shouting at him, screaming at him, the people are laughing. It's almost like that ridiculous 70s image of the comedy hen-packed husband that's alive and well in the 21st century. Now, that kind of attitude, that kind of behaviour, that would humiliate, that would devalue anyone's experience, especially if they're being assaulted or abused. And I'm not just talking about men here, I'm talking about anyone. But again, when it comes to the man, if he removes himself, tries to get away from that situation, he's laughed at for being cowardly. He becomes a figure of ridicule. So what's the alternative? Does he defend himself? Well, according to a study by Time magazine, men are less likely to defend themselves due to the belief that if they did, they'll be the ones who are prosecuted. And again, speaking to some of the male victims of abuse, some did defend themselves, even if it was physically restraining the other person who was repeatedly striking them, but they were the ones who were accused of being violent and aggressive. Now, yes, statistics do show women are more likely to be abused, in the sense that most of the reports of domestic abuse are made by women, and I'm not going to argue with those numbers, those statistics. However, I wonder how many victims don't report abuse. And out of that number, how many of them are men? Because again, according to recent research, men are twice as likely to hide the abuse. Now, if they're hiding it, that suggests they're living with it. They are not reaching out for the support that they need. Because in society, there's this presupposition that men are the aggressor. And I have heard the argument, if a woman attacks a man, she's defending herself or she's lashing out at something that he has done to cause it. It sounds like the victim has done something to deserve it. That attitude, I think, is both outdated and sexist. That mindset makes it even harder for men to report the abuse, to seek the help that they need. Are they going to be laughed at? Are they going to be believed? Will they be blamed for their own abuse? Let's call that what it is. It is insensitive. It lacks empathy. It is invalidating. It shames the victim and adds to the stigma of being on the wrong end of an abuser, and adds further barriers to seeking support. Now, if statistics are used to reinforce a certain narrative that domestic abuse is a gender issue, I would liken that to someone with, say, leukemia, skin cancer, someone with some kind of terminal illness, reaching out for help and being told, well, actually, most people die of colon cancer, and chances are you smoke. Who exactly does that help? How does that help anyone in that kind of situation? Now, yes, there are gender-specific crimes. I'm not going to argue with that. Domestic abuse is not necessarily a gender issue. It's a people issue. It's a human issue. People in same-sex relationships can be abused. People can be abused by their parents, their brothers, their sisters. Abuse and violence against anyone is wrong. Every one person who is not helped is one more abuser who is enabled, allowed to continue, allowed to get away with it. And that is regardless of their sex. Focusing on domestic abuse only on one section of society, it is focusing on, and it's only trying to solve part of the problem. Because the victim could be your son or your daughter, could be your brother or your sister, could be your dad as well as your mum. And you know what? It could be you. I think our presuppositions need to be challenged. I think the narrative needs to change. Some men abuse women. Some men abuse other men. Some women abuse men as much as they abuse other women. Or to try to be succinct, some people abuse other people. So they're my thoughts on male domestic abuse. If you have any comments, any queries, please use the comment box below. I do like reading your comments and responding to them when I can. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel for future updates on mental health related topics. And until next time, thanks for watching.